Hi everyone, Anthony Fantano here, internet's busiest music nerd, and it's time for a review of the new Armand Hammer LP, Race Music. Armand Hammer is a newly formed hip-hop duo out of New York consisting of MCs Elucid and Billy Woods. Elucid, pretty underground guy, on the come-up. You may remember him from his numerous features on a bunch of different Billy Woods tracks. And Billy Woods, you might remember him from some reviews I did of his recent LPs. The latest of which, Door Candy, I think might have grown on me a little bit since I initially reviewed it. However, I really pronounced the name of that LP wrong quite a few times in that review. Woods and Elucid kind of debuted this duo a little earlier this year, back in September, with a mixtape that had quite a few tracks on it. It really seems like a less polished and more grimy and sort of more rough around the edges, not necessarily in a flattering way, version of what we're being delivered on Race Music. Billy pretty much still comes through with that flow where it's like half spoken word, half passionately shouted. Lyrically, Billy's bars add up into what feels like an incredibly scattered narrative. A lot of very gritty and potent and very vivid, but disjointed imagery that sometimes, until you've heard the entire track and paid really close attention time after time after time, then you're able to kind of figure out how it all comes together and tells a story. But still, even not totally understanding what a lot of these songs are about, Billy's very sharp wit and his dark sense of humor really rings through on lines like "Bad trip, like you had to take the bus back," or "Weeks with no sleep, I'm living the dream." "Don't really want to know how it go, like ground beef, a mother's grief." Billy never comes through on this LP with a sharp or a speedy flow, not really his thing. Really, he's the kind of guy instead who will space all of his words out and emphasize things like raw emotion, theme, and concept. A lot like Billy Woods' History Will Absolve Me from 2012, you just get one track after another that dives into a different theme. Some very obvious from the lyricism and the title of the track itself, and others need lots of replay in order to fully comprehend. Because making sense of some of these tracks, it's really like putting puzzle pieces together. Like the song "HATCHET Job," which doesn't really tell a direct story, but if you pull all of the various lines together, it kind of tells something about doing dirt and not being able to trust someone or some people who you're working with or dealing with, and sort of being in fear of a double cross. And you've got moments lyrically where Billy Woods is saying, you know, "White man handshake, twinkle an eye, this new guy's got my spidey senses tingling." Later in the track, you're getting these lines about maybe some of this coming back to hurt your family. And on the track "SUNNI'S Blues," you get what is essentially a lot of imagery dealing with much of the conflict going on in the Middle East right now. Especially, it gets really vivid on the verse "Lucid" drops toward the end of the track, with children being mangled, but maybe from the perspective of the person seeing this, it's all for a just cause. Then you've got the track "WILLIE BOSKET," which is a really standout track on here because of how dark and just sad it is with its subject matter. You've got kind of mental illness on this track. Kids who are essentially underprivileged, living in urban areas, and are suffering from serious aggressive mental diseases and don't really have anywhere or anyone to turn to. And the track actually gets pretty disturbing, with Elucid rapping, narrating about one particular kid and sort of the suffering he's dealing with, and Billy Woods sort of turns it into another standpoint of a parent or a relative or just someone being afraid of what this kid might do, just how he lashes out. The song "No Roses" is sort of about these broken, damaged relationships, which it seems like there's a lot of adultery kind of being implied back and forth. It seems like there are some emotional hang-ups on this track too that I feel like I have to listen to a little bit closer in order to fully get them. But then on the back end of this LP, we have a song like "Nosferatu," which feels like it's another male to female relationship dichotomy. But what's going on here here lyrically just seems like a much more primeval and physical, sort of lustful kind of thing. You've got the song Duppy on here, which is actually a term, Jamaican patois for spirit. Billy Woods goes into grave detail a situation that went on when he was younger with his father dying and his funeral, and what seems like a lot of people in his family turning against his mother because there was some kind of suspicion that his death wasn't accidental. And Elucid comes through with a verse on the back end of this track, and what I like so much about him is that they both take a concept, and it seems like both of them run in a very different way with it, and yet it ends up so cohesive. He goes into a lot of just incantation type stuff, ritualistic type stuff lyrically, talks a bit about superstition as well. It's a really chilling track and maybe one of the most spacious, atmospheric instrumentals in this entire LP. Then there is Hand Over Fist, where it seems like we have 3 different verses with a guest rapper, Creature, hopping on this song, and each verse seems to paint a picture of people who seem to have lost their lives to drugs or addiction. There's just really sharp, detailed concept after sharp, detailed concept on this thing, where the wild things are. You've got kids kind of running wild in the streets, fighting, gang activity, just sort of falling in with the wrong people. I love Elucid's verse on this track, sort of talking about sort of the initial fights that kids get into being kind of a gateway into that, and having to stand up for yourself and using violence in a kid's youth as a rite of passage of sorts. And then we have Billy Woods on the back end, I feel like talking a little bit about the school system failing kids too, and failing to pull kids out of this cycle of violence. There's a really sharp line on here saying, "Waiting for Superman, the classroom's full of kryptonite." And then there is New Museum, a track with 4 different MCs, including Elucid and Billy Woods. I remember one of my critiques of Billy Woods' Door Candy was that we had this longer posse cut on the LP, but I feel like it sort of took away from the concept of the album, or didn't come through with a really strong theme, at least in my opinion. But this track definitely does, and it's kind of a tongue-in-cheek look at the everyday grind of the modern artist, with Billy talking about being addicted to the internet, constantly refreshing, always looking for what people are saying about you, but always coming across the same handful of mentions. You've got Open Mike Eagle rapping about his caliber as an artist and how he should be brought out with the show dogs, and how he's so dedicated he never breaks character. He's so dedicated he edits his own Wikipedia page. Elucid is rapping about NPR think pieces, being voted consistently average by other rap fans. And then Bus Driver's verses are taking an interesting theme in that they sort of bring the museum thing into place on this track, and he's shouting like a ringleader a bit on this song, in my opinion, and a lot of his verses have to do with very avant-garde, odd art that when you see it you actually question whether or not it's art. Just go into this expecting something kind of like a book of different short stories, with each tale telling a different story, or painting a perspective, or a character portrait. I should also mention Elucid's rap style on this album, because it is a pretty sharp variation from Billy's, and you can really tell the difference between these two rappers, not only with how they attack things lyrically, but with their flow, the sound of their voice too. For one, Elucid has this incredible rasp that sometimes swallows his words a little bit. His rasp really is overbearing sometimes, kind of like on A$AP Rock's latest stuff. And he definitely flows a lot more traditionally than a guy like Billy Woods does, who really spaces his words out. However, Elucid, I wouldn't say, because of his flow, is any more catchy than Billy Woods, because a lot of the flows that he uses are constantly changing or really off-kilter. In a lot of ways, he's just as non-traditional. They're a pretty good match, but I will say that with over an hour of material on this thing, it can get a little redundant, especially with a lot of the beats on here being so heavy, electronic, slow, noisy. However, each of these beats do have definitive characteristics, like the really wailing, off-kilter kind of dissonant synths on the track Hatchet Job, or the rumbling bass and the kind of interesting cult sample on the song New Museum. I just can't get away from cults. They're sampled right on the hook here, the song Go Outside. The pianos on Frog and Toad Are Friends, as well as Shark Fin Soup, are a pretty nice addition. The beat on New Roses is one of the speediest and detailed on this entire LP, and has this incredible gospel sampling going on in the background. It's a chaotic beat, but Elucid and Billy just cut right through it. WILLIE BOSKET actually goes in a trap direction, which we have Billy Woods and Elucid flowing over this track in the way way that a modern young trap rapper normally would, but of course the story and the personality that they bring to the table and the very noisy synths in the background really change up the flavor. The song Hand Over Fist has these odd reed instruments with this really quirky melody sampled in the background that I like a lot, that give that song a lot of personality. And then there's the song Cloisters, which is one of the more toned down, soft and jazzy tracks on the album. Really, there's just a lot of variety on this LP, despite the fact that it is so dark and the beats, again, are pretty lumbering. I would say that the Achilles heel of this album is, though, that it is so freaking dense. And while for people who are willing to give this album multiple listens, given they're already into Billy Woods and Elucid's style, this album rewards, it pays out a lot. However, it is so heavy with these loose, puzzling word assemblies that it may scare off some newcomers to Billy Woods, Elucid, Armand Hammer, whatever. Definitely not as many instantaneously catchy tracks in comparison to Door Candy or History Will Absolve Me, but in my opinion, an album that is about as enjoyable as those two releases. I'm feeling a light to decent 8 on this thing. Transition, but if you've given this LP a listen, what did you think of it? Did you love it? Hate it? Why? What do you think I should review next? And that's it. Anthony Fantano, Armand Hammer, forever.